So I recently did a video on this question about whether MrBeast was running illegal lotteries and whether he had anything legally to be concerned about. That question arose out of a video by someone named Dawson who says that he's a former employee of MrBeast. He started the channel Dogpack404 to basically call out MrBeast on a number of things, and after publishing his first video exposing MrBeast, then he came out with a follow-up. In the follow-up video, things actually get much darker as Dawson interviews Jake Weddle, another apparent former employee of MrBeast, who is actually also featured in some of MrBeast's videos. In the interview, Jake tells Dawson about how he was let go from his employment for MrBeast and then later invited back to be featured in a challenge video where he would see how long he could last in a prison-like solitary confinement. The longer he lasted, the more money he would receive. And what resulted was essentially what many people would consider to be days of torture. First psychological and then physical. So then assuming that what Jake told Dawson in the interview is true, could Jake sue MrBeast and MrBeast Productions? The short answer to that is yes and no. And I have to say, it's infuriating to have to answer it that way because after watching the interview, it's incredibly clear that Jake is still very much affected by this whole experience, even 3 years later. Let's get into it. So let's first get into what exactly happened. Like I said, Jake Weddle is apparently a former employee of MrBeast. He said he was essentially fired from MrBeast Productions after asking for a better wage for his job duties as an editor. He said he asked for it both for himself and for another coworker, and in the end, both of them lost their jobs. Now, in the wake of this, Jake said that because he had played nice with his former employer, he was invited back for an opportunity to make money through a challenge video.
So after your severance checks, how was your relationship with the company? I know you appeared in videos after that, right?
Right. So in videos where I was appearing in later, that's why you keep nice publicly. If you're nice in public, hey, Jake was nice in public. Let's have him back for something. Yeah, sure. So I was hoping they call back. And I appeared in some videos after I left. I think one of them was 3 days at a maximum security prison. If I did do mini challenges in that, I got paid. I was clocked in with a rate, and I would get paid and compensated for those. But there was one video I was in. I got paid a lot for it, but it didn't come out. It didn't come out because it didn't go well. There was a video that came out probably like a year ago, something like that. It got a lot of hot water when it came out. It was the surviving like $10,000 every day you survive in solitary or surviving solitary for whatever. It was one of those solitary confinement videos that got a lot of media attention because everybody saw the premise and thought, what? You shouldn't do that. And people don't know that was the second attempt. The first attempt was on me. And it didn't go well.
Now, to analyze all of this for potential liability purposes, one thing that's important here is to consider what Jake knew going into participating in this challenge video. And according to Jake, here's how it was pitched to him.
Call from somebody over there, and they go, hey, they want you for a video. I was like, oh, amazing, great, cool, thank God. What's the video? And they tell me the pitch. And they try to make the pitch sound like it's going to be like a walk in the park. The pitch is 100 days in solitary confinement, but don't worry, like you only have to last like 30. We have like a video. They're pitching it like at first it's going to be like a luxury vacation. You're going to have like a hot tub and an ice cream machine, and like part of the video is going to be you deciding like what items am I going to get rid of today, and it's like the choice. They were like, it's only going to be bad for me to last like 5 days tops when you have like nothing left. You're the first. It's going to be like a breeze for most of it. And by the end of it, after 30 days, you're going to get $300,000 because it's $10,000 a day. And I don't know, man. I grew up poor in North Carolina. I said, excuse me? I'll dance for you if you put that kind of money in my face, sure. They were like, you're going to be locked in this room, and we got to make sure you're on all the time. We're going to have cameras on you all the time, and you're perfect for this because you never shut the f*** up. On paper, I was like, okay, I can do this, and they always cut me out of the videos. They always, and I was, editors have told me that it's because you have too much of a personality. And so with this video, I thought, this is perfect. It's a video they can't cut me out of. I'm the guy. And so I thought, well, if I have to do this, if I have to do solitary confinement in order to do the things I want to do, then I will do that. that I held my tongue and I swallowed my pride and I tried to do one last ride. And I get there. And at first it's fine.
So after that kind of a pitch, it would seem that anyone would think, sure, sounds easy enough. Let's do this for 30 days and make $300,000. And remember, this is someone who had recently been fired from MrBeast Productions. Jake also said that he had worked for a bit for some other YouTube companies since then, but he was really looking to try to save up some money to move to New York for work as a writer and as a stand-up comedian. So you have someone who, going into it, needed the money and had a prior relationship with the company that gave him good knowledge of what they wanted him to do for the money. In other words, be entertaining, be engaging, perform for the cameras. But things started off poorly when Jake started off with this whole challenge.
And, I mean, they had just freshly painted the set. You could smell it, you know? Which, that's probably not good, you know, the smell of fresh paint in your surroundings for the next XYZ time. It looked good on the visual. Like it looks good on camera. You know, it's movie magic bullshit. It was a terrible facility. I mean, it was in one of the studios. They had to get a separate tank for, you know, septic stuff. Yeah, there was a hot tub in it. Yeah, there was an ice cream machine. Like, things were cool and funny on paper. But when you think about stuff, a hot tub that's not connected to a filtration system, give it 3 days, it's gonna stink. You know, there's not a hot water mechanism, so the hot tub was a lukewarm tub at best, which was a silly complaint, but the shower was always cold, and you're taking a quick shower, and I had cameras 24/7 on me, and the ice cream machine, let's talk about that for a second. The ice cream machine has 2 modes, on, bang, and off, reeking of smelly dairy, mildew, so I got to choose which sense was assaulted at a time. I couldn't have all of them good. So the little things started to build up. You know, there was the bug thing wasn't terrible, but it was a factor. And at first it was fine, you know, and you're playing it up because you know it's a video. And it got to a point where they weren't turning the lights off. You know, I asked them, I said, can we have nighttime hours? You know, and they said no, because it would up the time-lapse shots. The time-lapse of what? Me sleeping? Or me not sleeping? Yeah, I saw in other videos they did oh, you're gonna get XYZ hours of sunlight. Oh, great! Want to know how they figured that one out? I didn't have it. You know, one of the things was you got to take away your clock, so you didn't know what time it was. Okay, I got no access to sun. I got no access to clock. I don't know, the lights are on me all the time. I wasn't sleeping. I could not sleep, and I have insomnia problems now. But they might have started there. They're giving me, you know, melatonin. You know, it's not helping. You know, and then Jimmy would come in every other day for an hour, you know, to check in on me because he's doing other stuff. You know, I'm just the guy in the cage over here. He'll come back to me in a minute. And so he'd come by, he'd get the shots, he'd leave. Sometimes he'd have a note with the director over the phone. That would really piss me off. This is a note I got from the director, from Jimmy, when I'm receiving some cash. He said, Jimmy said, can you say to the camera how thankful you are that now you can pay back your student loans? You know how hard it was to do a take of that? To pretend to make it genuine? I don't want to have student loans. I don't want to be in a cage. But Jimmy's the guy with the money, and if you do what he says, he'll do what you want. You want your student loans paid off? You just be in this cage. And you have power over people. When one person doesn't have resources and the other one does, and they hold it over your head, and you go, of course, yeah, I agreed to it. I needed it, of course. Just something about having the cameras on me all the time. I was not having a good time, but we were filming a video, so I was trying my best to be funny. You know, I'm a dark comic. You know, I got bits about. I had a very traumatic life. I have my dad is in jail for assault of a minor. You know, so this kind of stuff is very near and dear to my heart. You know, I don't around with this. Yeah, I have jokes about that in my act. You know, I joke about it because that's what you do in a traumatic experience. You know, abusive relationships. I get out of it. The first thing I do is I do a type file about it. You know, so I'm in this situation where my mental health is not good, My physical health is getting worse, but we're filming. So I'm doing bits. I'm talking to the camera. And I'm being, like, hey, it's been a couple days. I'm not doing so hot, which if I'm filming a video, that's what I should be doing for the camera, but it was too real. If they're faking videos, why couldn't we fake this one? If we're allowed to let these cast members have some time off of this difficult challenge, how come we couldn't turn the lights off? How come we couldn't maybe not have some time-lapse footage for 10 seconds?
Did you try to get out?
Yes! I was starting to calculate, I don't know if I could do 30. How much how can I manage to get out of here sooner and still have a video and still have some cash and get the plug, man. I did. Since we're doing time-lapse shots, and since they insisted on time-lapse shots, I said, all right, we'll give you time-lapse shots back. I put my YouTube on with the whiteboard they gave me. And I was like, all right, yeah, go ahead and scrub that footage. You got that whiteboard. Oh, no, either that goes in or this footage is unusable. And then, James Warren came in and erased it. Don't put that. Hey, we can torture him. Don't you dare let him get a plug in there,
So after not much time, his situation starts to deteriorate to the point where members of the team are starting to come up to him asking if he's okay.
I'm locked in a cage at his whim. And I have to do things to get the cash I need to live. And I got these cameras on me all the time. And I was unwell. I had editors coming up to me saying, "You good, bud?" And I was like, "Yeah, why? You're clearly unwell." And he goes, "Well, because the footage you're sending in is haunting. Because I'm trying to be funny, but I am mentally decaying, so I'm doing bits." Someone said there is a horror cut of a video in this. And I'm thinking, like, who's watching this? Like, who wants to see this? What is fun about this, the video? And so And
eventually, Jimmy, MrBeast, comes in with 2 suitcases, one of them representing a challenge that he wanted Jake to do.
That made me I gotta get out. I can't do another day in a year. Jimmy comes in and I'm asleep. I don't know what time it is. I don't know, it's like 2 or 3 or whatever. He's like, "Why is he sleeping?" I don't know, because I can't sleep. And he comes in, he wakes me up. And he goes, "Ask me why I have 2 briefcases." And I'm like, why do you have 2 briefcases? And he goes, "Oh, because this one's for today, and this one's for the challenge." And I go, "What's the challenge today?" He goes, You're gonna run a marathon. You're gonna do the 22.6K, whatever it is, and you're gonna do it on that treadmill over there. The first challenge I did was a Rubik's Cube, and I'm dyslexic. I'm dumb. I don't know how to do a Rubik's Cube. So your first challenge, Rubik's Cube. I was like, "Oh, I don't want to do it." I was on camera. I don't want to do it. He goes, "Just do it for the thing." My kid, Like, there was an element of, Jake will do what we want because he's in-house. That's one of the reasons why they got me. Jake's, he's an inside guy, so he'll do whatever. We can push him a little extra hard because we know he's good. I couldn't say no to the treadmill thing. Yeah. So people who run marathons train forever, and it's still hard. Again, writer. Do I look like I run? I don't run, let alone a marathon, let alone have to train for it. So I was in a sunlightless,
Did you try to say no? Like, did you have a choice, or?
Based on the Rubik's Cube thing and based on all the other stuff, like there was so much pressure to just do it, just do the thing, And if I refuse, it's just, that's the whole video. I guess the budget's, so much money up in flames because Jake said he wouldn't want to do the thing. And so I wanted to be a good sport, and I wanted to get the boost, and I wanted the cash, and so I started running at 12. I was able to take some breaks, and I asked him, "How long do I have?" He goes, "Until I get back." And I'm running until 3 a.m. I got off the treadmill. Oh, the blisters I had on my feet were like, you wouldn't believe, just all over, just these big red. I couldn't walk. My muscles were like just the lactic acid. I got off the treadmill, and then the people that came in to like ice my feet, make sure I was good. Then that's when I was like, I'm done. I can't. I'm done. I'm done. I'm out. I'm out. I'm out. I'm out. I'm out. And that's when
So I actually have run multiple marathons before, both half and full. And I can tell you the experience of running a full marathon is nothing like that of running a half marathon. I will train with training plans for both half and full marathons, but I generally love the experience of half marathons way more than full marathons because you get the full physical exertion of the experience and you don't have to deal with your body basically starting to break down slowly in the process. And here, Jake is absolutely correct when he says that people will train for full marathons and still have a hard time finishing. Like for any race below 26.2 miles, people like to carbo load, and that's fine, but it's absolutely necessary to carbo load for a full marathon and to do it right, by the way. That's because there's an actual science to what happens to the human body after it's been running for a couple hours straight. And depending on how fast someone runs, this means that things get substantially harder after a certain mile. For example, after a couple hours of running, your digestive system stops working so your body can prioritize your lungs and your muscles that are carrying you forward. This is why marathoners will generally prioritize sugary snacks in the beginning half of a marathon because they're easy to digest and their body can still take it and actually use it at that point because their digestive system is still actually up and running. In my personal experience, when you get to around mile 18, the pain really starts to set in. You start repeating mantras in your head that match up with your footsteps to try to keep thinking positively and moving forward. You try to distract your thoughts away from negative ones. All kinds of things like that. And when your body can't take in more nutrients because you've been running for so long and it needs something to power you, it takes from the glycogen stores that are in your muscles. In other words, the carbs that you've spent the previous 24 to 48 hours loading up by eating literally nothing other than carbs. I'll never forget my first marathon, which was the Austin Marathon in Austin, Texas. Not Boston, Austin. And a very well-meaning woman was standing around mile 19 holding up a sign that she undoubtedly had seen somewhere as some kind of motivational quote on probably Pinterest. But I could tell that she had never run a marathon herself because the sign read something along the lines of, "Your body isn't giving up, your head is, keep going." And I was so angry when I saw this sign because I was exhausted, in pain, and just trying to keep my mind away from negative thoughts and negative words and focused on trudging forward one step at a time. And the words that stuck out to me in her sign were, "Giving up." Those were the last words that I needed to see in that moment. And yet here was this woman waving a sign in front of me, plopping those words directly into my head. If I wasn't feeling so physically weak and just trying to desperately not stop for fear that maybe I wouldn't start running again afterwards, I would have given this woman a piece of my mind to explain to her how poorly thought out her sign was. And again, I'm sure she meant well, and she probably had no idea that her sign had the opposite effect of what was actually intended. But that's the level of mental degradation and mental toughness that you need to go through that is the experience of just running a marathon. And by the way, one where you start off well rested and in a very clear headspace. Jake, on the other hand, was being required here to run a full marathon after days of sleep deprivation and living in an unsanitary environment that reeked of bad hot tub water and mildewy ice cream and more. And all of this was after never having trained to run a marathon, not even having any kind of notice that he might have to do something like this. If part of the entrance criteria for this whole challenge were to have a certain level of physical fitness or to have trained physically for something, that would be one thing. But to me personally, as someone who actually has run marathons, it's absolutely shocking to me that they would have this guy that they were essentially keeping awake for so many days straight. And on top of that, who doesn't actually run in the first place. And then they have him run a marathon, a full marathon, through a process of coercion. So it's completely understandable to me that this was the final straw for Jake.
Longer, you guys are gonna keep me in here. And the guy goes, realistically, like at least 7 more days? No. And they didn't let me leave right away either. They wanted to make sure, everything was fine. So I just, slept for a while. They turned the lights off. And they brought, it's like they brought in all my friends, to make it. They brought in all the people I liked and Jimmy. And everybody was around me making sure I was good, making sure I was okay. But Jimmy had his he was sitting in the chair turned around like an evil villain. Swear to God. Everyone was looking at me and he was like Lex Luthor over there. And he turns around, he stands up. He does the exact same thing when he's pretending to have a human connection. You know when you're watching a video and he's like, oh, stop, you're gonna make me cry. And he like touches his eye or whatever as if he's crying. He's just... I didn't have to pretend to do that shit. She says, as if rehearsed by his lawyers. Yeah, you know, your mental health's the most important thing. You know, just want to make sure you're okay. And the last thing we want you to do is... I can almost hear the word sue come out of his mouth. The S, he just stopped right before it got out. I did not get the 300K. What I got, he goes, think of it this way. At least you get to keep what you earned. You know, you were in there for XYZ days. You did XYZ challenges, so you got, 100,000 some change, give or take.
So that was Jake's final experience at the MrBeast studios. And from what he said in this interview, it sounds like the liability issue may have been at the forefront of MrBeast's mind at the end of this challenge. So, could Jake sue Jimmy and MrBeast and MrBeast Productions over this whole ordeal? I said at the beginning that the answer to that is basically yes and no. And I said that that was an infuriating conclusion to have to make with all of these things considered. So let's start first with the yes part of the yes and no. What liability claims could Jake have against Jimmy? More than anything else, I see a pretty clear claim here for intentional infliction of emotional distress, or IIED for short. To win on a claim of IIED, Jake would need to prove the following. First, he would need to show that the defendant, in this case MrBeast or MrBeast Production Company, engaged in conduct that was extreme or outrageous. Second, he would need to show that MrBeast or the production company engaged in that conduct either intentionally or recklessly. Third, Jake would need to show that after everything happened, he experienced severe emotional harm. And finally, Jake would need to show that the severe and emotional harm was actually caused by the defendant's conduct. So let me first say that, in my opinion, elements 3 and 4 are pretty easily met here. To start off, Jake shared some text messages with Dawson in the days that followed this challenge, where he was talking about the physical and emotional harm that he was still dealing with, that he was seeing his therapist, and that his therapist was actually very concerned about him. And it was clear throughout the interview that Jake is still very much wrestling with what he experienced during his challenge. It's been about 3 years since then, and he's still weighed down by the experience, as you can tell by the fact that he often is talking through tears and then attempting to take the edge off of what he's saying with jokes. He even mentioned that he has insomnia these days, and he suspects it was triggered by being in this video. Now, I have litigated IIED claims before, and all of this points to continuing emotional distress, and it's clear that this was caused by this whole experience. So elements 3 and 4, in my opinion, would easily be met. So looking at the first element of IIED then, when we talk about extreme or outrageous conduct, this is determined by a reasonable person standard. Essentially, a court is going to ask, is this the kind of thing that we as a society will tolerate? Examples of things that in the past have been considered extreme or outrageous conduct include things like threats from a debt collector, that if you don't pay up, they'll harm you or your family. Or if someone knows that you have a fear of spiders and they release some really, really big ones in your close proximity. Or it could be a racist or sexist comment directed at someone in the workplace, or firing someone for making a legitimate request for a religious holiday or for a disability accommodation. And in this case, we're looking at a series of elements the MrBeast team subjected Jake to on a regular basis, which he wasn't made aware of going into it. You have the incessant noise from the ice cream machine, or conversely, the strong mildew smell. Then you have the hot tub smell from it lacking a proper filtration system. Then you have the lights staying on all day and night and removing the clocks from the room. Now, I understand that the timelessness element was intended to stimulate a more real experience of solitary confinement for purposes of the challenge, but MrBeast's team has a responsibility to do some research into what can happen to a human being under these kinds of circumstances. I mean, Jake and Dawson mentioned this in the video, that refusing to turn off the lights is considered torture under international law. And I will say, this is nevertheless a common feature of solitary confinement, although many prisons will also dim the lights at certain hours, apparently. This is one of the reasons why solitary confinement in American prisons is actually pretty controversial and is considered torture by the UN's Convention Against Torture. So right off the bat, the whole premise of the video is pretty iffy. But there, of course, is a counterpoint to all of this. Jake consented to the challenge. He knew he was going to solitary confinement for $10,000 a day. So someone could look at that and say, he consented to all of this. He knew what he was getting himself into. But that's why I thought it was important to highlight earlier what Jake said about the pitch that he received for the challenge from MrBeast's team ahead of time. In that pitch, they downplayed the difficulty of the challenge, and they said that it really wouldn't be difficult until like maybe the last 5 days. Those kind of statements are entirely antithetical to what Jake described was his actual experience. And all of that matters for this issue of whether or not he actually consented to this whole experience. This tells me that going into the challenge, he also expected that there would be some sort of a softening to the challenge, at least at some points, as typically happens in the production of MrBeast videos, which he knew, and he definitely would know, having been an employee of MrBeast before. And then as they were observing him throughout this entire process, and then having conversations with him about turning off the lights or not turning off the lights, they could tell that he was mentally deteriorating over time. There were people coming to check up on him over that time precisely because they were concerned about the effect that it was having on him. Given that they could see his continuing mental decline, deciding to proceed under those circumstances that were degrading him was extreme and outrageous. And that's not even counting the treadmill marathon. I've already talked about how grueling a marathon is when you are in the best of conditions going into it. But to someone who going into it was doing it because he was just desperate for the money, and MrBeast's team actually knew this about him, and then you put him in a situation where he hasn't slept for days and is completely mentally degraded, and then you tell him to run a marathon on a treadmill. Everyone involved in this video is lucky that he didn't pass out on the treadmill, hit his head, and then require hospitalization. And that's because I can easily envision a situation where he would have passed out from exhaustion and died from hitting his head. In fact, there's a guy named Christopher Gregor who was just sentenced to 25 years in prison for something somewhat similar from an incident in March 2021. His sentencing came after a conviction of aggravated manslaughter and child endangerment for forcing his 6-year-old son to do abusive treadmill workouts that led to his death. During the incident, Gregor kept increasing the speed of the treadmill and forcing his son Corey to jump on it and run, even though Corey apparently fell off up to 6 times. Ultimately, young Corey died days later from blunt force trauma and lacerations to his heart and liver, according to autopsy reports. Now, obviously, these two situations are a bit different. The Christopher Gregor case was one where he was legitimately physically forcing his son onto a treadmill and requiring him to run at fast speeds. And obviously we were talking about a 6-year-old here. And that's different from Jake's situation because for one thing, he is an adult. And for another thing, he also was able to complete the marathon basically in his own time, apparently. And there was no one setting a specific speed for him. But my point is, Jake was in this coercive environment where he knew the financial and social impact of his refusal to do the challenge would result in some bad consequences for him. And when he's sleep deprived and weak, that can be a very powerful tool for coercion, even into a possibly dangerous situation. Not to mention, it also makes running a marathon basically torturous. And so I think that if, God forbid, something happened and Jake tripped and hit his head and didn't wake up, there would be a criminal investigation into everything that happened there that day and some potential criminal charges for manslaughter, maybe murder. And anyway, at any rate, I think that it absolutely satisfies this first element of IIED of extreme and outrageous conduct. So then, looking back at IIED, we have the final element, which is the second one on the list, which asks, was this intentional or reckless conduct by the defendant? Intentional means that the defendant actually intended to cause this harm. I don't know if we can find that specifically here, unless there was some sort of vendetta that someone at MrBeast Productions had against Jake, or if they were actually looking for a mental breakdown for purposes of the clicks. Based on what I've seen of MrBeast videos in the past though, and from Jake's telling of what happened, I don't necessarily think that they were looking to capture a mental breakdown. If they did, there would likely be a lot of widespread criticism over that, and I suspect that that's why they ended up not publishing this video. So I don't know that we could show that this was actually intentional. However, I think that there absolutely is an argument to say that the MrBeast team, and quite possibly MrBeast himself, engaged in this conduct recklessly. Now, recklessness means that the defendant knew or should have known that a certain behavior or conduct was reasonably likely to result in substantial harm to the plaintiff, but that the defendant disregarded that knowledge and that risk and engaged in that conduct anyway. In this case, an argument can definitely be made that they knew or should have known that the conditions that they were putting Jake under were likely to cause him harm over 30 days. I mean, it really only takes 2 seconds of research to come across all kinds of information about the incredibly negative psychological impact of solitary confinement in prison inmates. And anytime a group of people is going to put someone under these kinds of conditions of confinement outside of a prison context, they arguably have a duty to do some kind of research into these kinds of impacts to ensure that they don't actually harm the participant. And on top of that, the longer that this challenge progressed with what seems to be clear signs of Jake's mental decline, the longer that the MrBeast team decided to continue down this path of arguably torturous conduct, the stronger the argument for recklessness becomes. Furthermore, recklessness can also be found with evidence of someone's personal motive to do something. For example, MrBeast and the MrBeast team have a clear motive to engineer this whole thing for clicks and engagement, since the whole purpose of doing this whole thing is for a YouTube video. So it's within their own personal interest to use whatever methods they can to make this challenge both more difficult and longer lasting, even at the perhaps ethical expense of the participant. So all of that is to say, I think that there's recklessness in the extreme and outrageous conduct in spades here. So like I said earlier, I really do think that there is a clear claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress here. But then I have to mention the bad part for Jake here. If he decided at some point that he wanted to sue MrBeast and MrBeast Productions for this whole incident, as of this date, he is just outside the statute of limitations. Under North Carolina law, as is common in most states, the statute of limitations for intentional infliction of emotional distress is 3 years. And based on the date stamps of those text messages, which were supposedly a few days after the challenge, it looks like all of this happened at some point in July 2021. So all of that means that Jake's SOL would have run out at some point last month. So MrBeast lucks out mightily here, because once the statute of limitations runs out, there is no way to bring any kind of a claim. And that is really unfortunate in this case, because it looks like Jake really has been scarred by this whole experience, which is heartbreaking. And he could have had a pretty good case to sue, actually for a lot of money for compensation for those damages. But those are my thoughts. What do you think? Do you think that this was the kind of experience that would be worth suing over, or just something to walk away from and learn from the experience somehow? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this, or at least found it interesting or informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you're new here and you want to see more crazy cases and interesting legal topics, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is out there. And if you're really enjoying the content and you want to know how to best support the channel, consider becoming a member of Byte Club. You can join either through YouTube memberships or by becoming a supporter on Patreon. Links to both are in the description below. Otherwise, see you in the next video.